When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be talking about Jon Arryn and if he was a good Hand of the King. I find this to be a very fascinating subject just based upon the idea of Jon Arryn is such a complex character, and we don't actually get to see a lot of his time, ruling as Hand of the King. We hear about it through other people like Robert Baratheon or Ned Stark or other characters that are in the Small Council in Book 1. We hear about some of his past and what he was doing in between Robert's Rebellion and then also the beginning of the main story. And so the real question that I have for you guys, without me providing any of the things that he was doing or the evidence of why I think maybe he was a good or a bad Hand of the King, what do you guys think about Jon Arryn? Let me know down in the comments, was he a good Hand of the King or a bad Hand of the King? So let's kind of do a timeline of events of what he was doing, and then I'll kind of give you my own thoughts and give my conclusion as to how I think, he was as a Hand of the King. So Jon Arryn becomes Hand of the King basically right after Robert's Rebellion. It wasn't in any doubt. Jon Arryn was the clear cutout choice. He was the father figure of someone like Robert Baratheon. He was somebody that was considered, the wiser, of the three, Robert, Ned, and Jon. It made perfect sense that he would be the person that would become Hand of the King. He was also Warden of the East. He controlled the Vale. He's somebody that made perfect sense to become the Hand of the King. Now, he does a couple of actions right off the bat that are basically, okay, what are they going to do with the Lannisters? What are they going to do with the Dornish issues because of how Robert's Rebellion finishes and kind of securing Robert's reign? So let's kind of look at the Dornish issue first. This one creeps up in the year following Robert's Rebellion. Oberyn Martell seemed to be gathering men to support Viserys Targaryen, but it doesn't actually come to war. Jon Arryn takes a trip down to Dorne with Lewyn Martell's bones, and there is a peace that is made. Now, something that will connect to the Lannister appeasement is that none of the people that were involved in the death of Elia were actually given to the Martells. They were allowed to live. This is something that would keep a lot of tension built up between the Crown and also Dorne. It's the reason that when the War of the Five Kings breaks out, Dorne doesn't really have a clear backing of any of the candidates. And so this would be a major issue right away. So the real question we have to ask is, one, what actually happened in Dorne? Was it just something like, Duran just played the passive route, realizing he couldn't oppose Robert Baratheon at this time? They just didn't have the manpower to basically defeat a Baratheon, Stark, Arryn, Lannister alliance. It just wasn't possible. Throwing Tully in there as well. Really all of the Seven Kingdoms outside of maybe the Tyrells. The Tyrells and the Dornish don't get on well, so I think it's maybe not as suspicious as some people have claimed. I think it's just what we see with Duran in the main story. Duran is somebody that looks at the situation realistically and goes, yeah, this isn't our time, right? We don't have a clear path of winning a war with the Crown, so we kind of have to just roll with the punches. And so I think that's what ended up occurring in Dorne. I think that Jon Arryn didn't really have to do all that much to really get Duran Martell to see the situation. I do think it's interesting that we never know what Jon Arryn really told Duran Martell. We don't know anything of what really occurred here. I think it could be something interesting if we do get in the future, maybe Barristan found out some sort of information or he overheard what Jon Arryn did in Dorne. That would be cool because we really don't have any clarification in that, and it's a very important part of the aftermath of the Robert's Rebellion era. So let's go then jump back to King's Landing. So there's a lot to deal with here. So the first thing you have is the Lannister stuff. So the Lannisters kill both of the Targaryen children and kill Elia. Again, allegedly, I guess, even though it's quite clear that it was under Tywin's orders. And so that occurs. Jaime kills the king. There's a lot of different war crimes that occur because of the Lannisters. A lot of not so great things. You got to remember what people know about Jaime. All they know is that Jaime killed the king. They don't know the circumstances around what actually happened because Jaime didn't make that actually known. And so the clear, paths were, okay, do you pardon Jaime and Tywin and the Mountain and Lorch? Do you pardon all these people? Or do you do a mixture of those things? And also, who's going to become Robert's queen? Now, I did a video on this in the past, and I actually did come to the conclusion that Cersei really was the best option for Robert. I know we can look at it with hindsight and know that that relationship doesn't work, and a lot of that's really actually because of Robert, not really Cersei. Even though Cersei's still not the most likable character, yeah, a lot of that was because of Robert. Now, when you think about the candidates available for Robert to marry, it made the most sense to marry Cersei to Robert, even with the Lannisters kind of being a little bit suspect as they come in at the very end of the war. I do think that makes a lot of sense. It would tie Tywin to your alliance that's already really big, like I talked about earlier when I mentioned all the different alliances going on, with the Lannisters now forming into the Stark, Tully, Arryn alliance, all of that Baratheon alliance. And we even know that kind of the Lannisters were already trying to do that, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, the other stuff I think is where it gets much more muddied because I think the correct option would have been, and I think this would have worked the best for Robert's reputation, keeping your allies close, making sure that rift isn't as strong. And the issue is going to be, would Tywin allow Jaime to be sent to the wall? And I think that's a tough one because if Tywin doesn't allow Jaime to be sent to the wall, what can he really do about it? Like, he doesn't have any allies at all. He's completely outnumbered. And so the trade-off, and why I think Cersei being queen could make a lot of sense, would have been that, okay, even though you're sending Jaime to the wall, you are then allowing that Cersei's going to become queen. Her children could then, rule Casterly Rock if you don't want Tyrion to be that person. So I think Tywin would allow it, but I don't know because you think about how he reacts to Jaime being captured by Robb. It's a tough one, and I do understand why Jon Arryn and Robert would pardon Jaime against what Ned wished, and that there's a big rift between Ned and the Crown because of the actions that they do. They kind of take all the appeasement routes, right? They allow Cersei to become queen. They allow Jaime to stay in the Kingsguard. They basically pardon anything that Lorch the Mountain or Tywin did. So when you think about all these things, I think that Jon Arryn allowed for too much Lannister influence. I think that there should have been good things, handled to them. They did join Robert's Rebellion's side. They did join Robert Baratheon's side. They're trying to extend their arm to the new regime. But at the same time, they did do a lot of actions. And so I think people like, especially Amory Lorch and the Mountain, who are not that important to Jaime, should have been killed. I think they should have been executed for their crimes. Now, could Jon Arryn have influenced that? Who knows, right? Because Robert Baratheon was not something that was going to punish people for killing Targaryens. And so that's why I think Lorch and the Mountain got off, not because of Jon Arryn's influence. And so this is kind of where you run into that issue where how much influence does Jon Arryn have? And at times, it seems like Jon Arryn had that sway, but Robert Baratheon also was somebody that was very stubborn, wouldn't listen to reason sometimes, especially when it involved the Targaryens. And so I think you come to this issue where you can't blame Jon Arryn on certain things that ended the war because he was the one that pushed for Cersei to become queen, which was, I think, a very smart move. It made the most amount of sense. Hindsight, we can know that that doesn't work out, but with what the information they had, it was a perfect match, you would have thought. But yeah, a lot of the issues that you can look at with the Lannisters comes down to Robert Baratheon, not so much Jon Arryn. But it's a smear against his career. He wasn't able to get Robert maybe to punish the Lannisters, not give them as much that he ends up doing. And so, that kind of transitions us into the ruling aspect, right? That peacetime, between Robert's Rebellion and the main story. Now, there is the Greyjoy Rebellion in there as well, but the Crown deals with that pretty well. It gets put down very quickly. Now, Balon Greyjoy is kind of an idiot for even doing it to begin with, but, they do handle it quite well. Now, one thing I will say with this idea that Jon Arryn was never able to really, quench this character of Robert Baratheon having tournaments and all this stuff, and that ends up basically bankrupting the realm. And how much can you put that on Jon Arryn? And the question that I have for it is, how do we get around the fact that, Robert Baratheon was able to be convinced all these times in the past, but all of a sudden that just stopped when Robert became king? I'm not sure. because Jon Arryn had more influence over Robert than it would appear Ned did. But at the same time, I don't know. And the problem is we don't have a lot of information here. Now, what I will say is I think the reason that eventually these tournaments became even more frequent and the, bankrupting of the realm became even more was because of when you eventually get to the point where people like Littlefinger are on the small council and you have people like Varys who, that was kept on even after being with Aerys, which I think was another bad move. Keeping Varys, somebody that was extremely dangerous, a spy master, showed loyalties to the Targaryens, makes no sense. This person, I think Varys should have either been sent into exile or probably executed. I think that's something that Jon Arryn could have definitely gotten Robert to do, but refused to do so. I think you look at Jon Arryn also bringing Mandon Moore into the Kingsguard. Terrible decision, a terrible person to become on the Kingsguard. So you look at Jon Arryn, that was a bad decision. Littlefinger being put onto the small council. Yes, he was really good with money, but at the same time, this is a guy that allegedly had some relations with Lysa. Did he know that? Probably not. I mean, you could have maybe heard the whispers, but, you also have Littlefinger who was really close with Catelyn as well. Probably don't want to bring him into the small council, especially when your wife is pushing for it out of almost nowhere. I mean, it's hard to judge because Jon Arryn seems like he's a person that's very bad at judging people's character. You think about the people that he puts into positions, he's not very good at those things. And, it's kind of similar to Ned, but I would even say that Jon Arryn is worse at recognizing people, like who they are, than Ned was. Like Ned understood kind of, oh yeah, Littlefinger is somebody I can't trust, all that stuff. The only reason that he gets so dependent on Littlefinger is because he has to, right? And he puts himself kind of in a bit of a bad situation by giving away a lot of his power, like his men. He sends them with, like, say, Beric, or, sending guards into the gold cloaks. So, yeah, I think Jon Arryn, I think the biggest issue that I have with him as Hand of the King is he's not a good judge of character. That just seems very apparent when you have two of his biggest appointments that we know of being, bringing Mandon Moore to court and then having Robert make him a Kingsguard, and Littlefinger going on to the small council and keeping Varys on the small council. Just a terrible move. Even in my opinion, like Pycelle. Now, Jon Arryn, I don't think would have known that Pycelle was like a Lannister lackey. But I will say, Ned picks up on that instantly. Ned knows that Pycelle is a lackey for Cersei quite early on. So it's another kind of smear there if you're Jon Arryn and you're not replacing somebody like Pycelle. So I don't know. I think, as we go through all the events and, eventually Jon Arryn starts to put it together that, that Robert's children are not actually his. It's just like, why did it take this long? Right? Like, that's the thing I kind of think about. And, Stannis was also somebody that prompted that and had Jon Arryn start looking into it. But why did it take this long? Right? Jon Arryn should know Robert better than anybody. And when you see all of his kids start popping out and they don't look like him at all, it just, I don't know. I look at it and I go, Jon Arryn wasn't able to temper Robert whatsoever. He himself did not seem to be a good judge of character. I think it's a weird one because I think Jon Arryn, policy-wise and what he could have been with a half-decent king, because Robert's a terrible king. Well, let's keep that 100%. He is a terrible king. If Jon Arryn was given a better king, like maybe even just a middle-of-the-pack king, if you look at Targaryens and Baratheons, I think he would be a decent Hand of the King. But when you put him in a bad situation where he's with a bad king, he himself is not the best Hand of the King, it just makes him look worse. And so my conclusion by the end of the video is I think Jon Arryn was a pretty okay Hand of the King. He had his strengths, he had his weaknesses, and those kind of were very apparent, right? And so what I say, oh yeah, Jon Arryn, he wasn't the problem with Robert's reign. No, I think Jon Arryn, just as much as Robert, also made issues for the crown. Notably, characters like Littlefinger and some of the decisions that were being made at court. But do I also think that he's a terrible hand of the king, that he didn't do good things, like negotiating with Dorne to keep them from going to war and a rebellion? I think he did good on that. I think at times he gave good counsel to Robert, like for instance, Cersei and his, idea of marrying her to Robert. I think that was good. The way that he would bite the bullet and, for the alliance, marry Lysa was really good. Even the way that he doesn't understand that his wife is undermining him, that his child might even be Littlefinger's. His child doesn't look anything like him, really. Like, there's all these things there that just leave this question mark around Jon Arryn. And so to me, I don't have a strong opinion on him being good or bad. I think he's kind of just there. Good qualities, bad qualities. But let me know what you guys think. I also had this video recommended to me. I can't remember who recommended it, but if you were the person that recommended this to me, I appreciate the video idea. I think this was a really fun topic to do. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.